Kia ora koutou, or welcome. I'll kick us off with a few just housekeeping things, a few quick reminders. If you're happy to, during the session, rename yourself with your full name and your organization, you're welcome to do this. Just if you click participants, hover over your name, click the 3 dots, and then you can rename yourself. Just a reminder to keep your mic on mute and your video on unless you've got some connectivity issues. Ideally, we'll have some questions at the end, but if you have any burning questions, feel free to use the chat, pop them in the chat, and we'll get to them after the presentations. Any IT issues, feel free to pop that in the chat as well. Someone will hopefully be able to help you with that. And just a note on confidentiality, these sessions will be recorded, but we do ask that people don't take any pictures of the screen or of the other participants without their permission. The speakers will let us know if they are going to share these slides at a later date. So yeah, that's everything. I'll pass it on off to Fiona and she can kick us off with the presentation.
Kia ora, and no mai haere mai, which in New Zealand is Te Reo Māori for welcome together, coming together. I'm going to kick us off with a karakia to open. Karakia in Aotearoa, New Zealand relates to, for me, really the ability to settle, begin a proceeding, get us all in the same space. Some people use the term it's a blessing. It's not necessarily a religious related, although it can be for those who want to, but really getting us in the right place and coming together so we can focus on our agenda. So I will say our karakia to start us off. E tu whānau, whaia te mātauranga kia marama, kia whaia taki nā mahi katoa, tu maia, tu kaha, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia tātou katoa. So for everybody gathered here today, we seek knowledge for understanding, have purpose in all that you do, stand tall, be strong, let us show respect for one another. Welcome to this session on what we've been doing in Aotearoa, New Zealand, in terms of engaging our volunteers and engaging our young people to help us build and achieve our strategy for 2030. So we've got a little bit of a blurb here about what we're doing, and feel free to have a read of that with the slides when they come around. We're going to be having a bit of a Q&A session after doing some presentation. But I've got some important introductions to do first of all. So the people that are here with you today is myself. I'm the General Manager of People Experience and Support. So I am here to help look after all the people of New Zealand Red Cross, and that includes members and employees. And of course, members include those who volunteer their time in our country. We've got Laine, who is working on volunteering and membership issues all the time. Community Engagement Impact Lead. I think we've got a new title for you now, Anna, from that. But Anna is basically at the helm of pulling together a lot of our thinking and work on how we achieve realising 2030 reimagining volunteering for our people. Charlie Eggleton is somebody who has been working previously in New Zealand Red Cross, still very much associated with New Zealand Red Cross, and had a youth activator role, and we'll be talking about the work we did on a youth engagement strategy. And Kurt Solomon is our senior advisor on youth, again working very closely on the youth strategy. And who you don't see in the photos here is Sarah Bowen, who is helping us manage and navigate all of this session. So thank you very much, Sarah, for that. So I think those are the key parts of the introductions. Strategy 2030. I want to give you a little bit of context about Strategy 2030 for our New Zealand Red Cross. So our mission to improve the lives of vulnerable people by mobilising the power of humanity, enhancing community resilience. I think this really speaks for us to this idea of a group of people, New Zealanders, vulnerable people. I think the definition of who is vulnerable can change at any time, depending on whether you're in a response or a recovery or a resilience building type of mode. But my favourite part of this mission that we have to achieve our strategic goals is mobilizing the power of humanity. How do we mobilize people to help people be in communities, be in groups, thrive and enhance themselves? And for us, research and engaging people themselves has been an absolutely critical way of mobilizing that power and achieving that community resilience. Ka mua ka muri, walking backwards into the future, is a saying that we thought was really encapsulating where we're trying to head. So really, I guess we'll be talking about how we've been doing that journey up next. So what I'm going to start with is handing over to Charlie to talk about the youth engagement work we did, which has resulted in a youth engagement strategy. That strategy is the first thing that we wanted to do to help us achieve our 2030 strategy. So putting youth right at the centre of our thinking and our future as New Zealand Red Cross. So I'm going to hand over to you now. Charlie, thanks very much.
Wonderful, thanks Fiona. Kia ora koutou katoa, or hello everyone. My name's Charlie, as introduced before. Firstly, I just want to acknowledge the team that I worked with alongside on this journey. So Sacha, Fiona, Tallulah, and Devon. So there was a team of 5 of us that tackled this, and it really was a whole team effort right the way across. So what we did when we went about our youth engagement research, which led into the youth engagement strategy, is we first of all, we started with a survey, and we carried out that survey in 2019. We had the ambitious goal of wanting to get 1,000 young people to feed into the survey, and ended up with 853, which I'm pretty stoked about. I think that was a great effort, and we did that. Of those 853, about 100 young people were currently involved in New Zealand Red Cross, and the rest were just different young people from around Aotearoa. So that was a great success to have that diversity of voice. Next, what we did is we took some of the themes from the survey and dug a little bit deeper into focus groups. And so we held 10 of these focus groups up and down the country. So we did some with other youth sector organisations. So for example, one was done up in Auckland with a disability organisation. We did one that was entirely done with sign language, so those who are deaf and hard of hearing. So just to kind of show you the different groups we engaged with, as well as doing some in big cities and also some in small like rural communities. Another part of the youth engagement strategy is we also did interviews with 14 external organisations. And this was just to understand what was going to be the unique offering for New Zealand Red Cross when it comes to the youth space. Here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have quite a lot of youth sector organisations. And so we didn't want to start competing or trying to do what other organisations were already doing. We wanted to work in partnerships. So those interviews took place to understand what were they up to, where do they see New Zealand Red Cross existing currently, and where do they see us going? And so that was a really good benchmark to understand how others perceive New Zealand Red Cross as well in the youth sector. The other part of our youth engagement behind the scenes was we did a review of domestic and global literature. So myself, I did a lot around adventure-based learning. So that's when you take young people outdoors and do things like rock climbing or kayaking. But I also looked at what was happening across the globe in other Red Cross societies. So I'm very thankful to anyone who gave me their time, whether it was via an email or a Zoom at silly o'clock in the morning. And then finally, we did a survey with our members and our volunteers. And this is so that we could understand what were their hopes, dreams, and aspirations when it came to engaging young people in New Zealand Red Cross. So we'll go to the next slide, which is all around the discovery phase. Oh, sorry, we'll talk a bit more about the survey and then I'll go into the discovery after that. So first thing, one of the questions we asked in the youth engagement survey was around, do you feel like you're excluded or discriminated against based on different social identities? So as you can see here, out of the different categories, we had things like gender, we had if you've got a physical disability, based on your race, if you've got mental illness, sexual orientation and ethnicity. So we asked, do you feel discriminated or excluded from opportunities based on this? So you can kind of see the results of what young people thought. So they obviously, there was a high amount of young people that thought that, you know, there's a lot of discrimination and exclusion that happens based on ethnicity. Actually, nearly every social identity we listed, as you can see, saw there was discrimination. And there was very few young people that thought nobody got discriminated against. So we realized that going forward, our programming would have to be inclusive and also making sure that it was open to all people from different backgrounds. So we'll go to the next slide. Awesome. So this was a really important question, was we said, well, why would you want to become involved with New Zealand Red Cross? And I think this is also, Kurt will get into this soon, kind of, we decided to go, okay, well, from these learnings, why would young people want to be involved? A huge thing was around responding to global issues, but locally, so contextualizing it to what's happening in New Zealand, but caring about that wider thing. We know young people can access information more now than ever. They can pick up their phone, jump on Twitter, jump on Facebook, if they're still on Facebook, jump on Google and find out what's happening in the world. There was also wanting to feel a sense of hope, about humanitarian problems and how can we respond to disasters. So we'll go to the next one. So what did we discover? So we discovered that participants expressed a desire that they wanted to be able to collaborate, they wanted it to be inclusive, and they wanted to have a relationship with humanitarian organizations such as Red Cross. What was really interesting, that whilst there was a huge sense of belonging, there was also a really high percentage that said they were isolated due to social agencies. So that's what I touched on before with social agencies. And what was really interesting was that the levels of isolations were really high, and this was even prior to COVID. So we can only imagine that this is amplified even more, but that's just something to note. As I said before, we also talked with our members, and we got them to do a very similar survey. And what members actually said was that they understood what issues young people cared about. They knew they cared about climate change and social justice. What they wanted to know more is how to understand those issues when it related to young people. So there was a bit of a disconnect around, like, well, what do you mean you're isolated? You know, you're on your phone all the time and stuff like that. So it was about bridging that intergenerational gap and understanding. Cool. So I'm going to hand over to Kurt, who's going to talk about one of the programs that got implemented as part of the youth engagement strategy going forward. So over to you, Kurt.
Kia ora. Thank you, Charlie. So on the basis of all of that research that Charlie was talking about, we first piloted the Youth Psychological First Aid course in September 2021. So it's a course that aims to upskill young people in supporting others, whether that's their peers or their whānau, their family. So we provide them with the knowledge and skills to support others. So it's a 6-hour course delivered to groups of young people, 15 to 30. It's aimed at those with strong personal resilience, so not those who are struggling already, but those who have the capacity to support others. And it aims to improve lives by enhancing participants' abilities to support their peers, families, and communities. So that's the course that we've been running since 2021. And since then, there have been 16 courses with 166 participants. And we're getting really great results so far. So overall, they found it to be quite valuable, 86%. So we hold pre and post-course surveys, and we can assess changes in the level of confidence in psychosocial support, which we've seen to increase, and confidence in identifying distress, which we've also seen to increase, post-course awareness of mental health and well-being services. And then at the end, we can assess their interest in volunteering as well. And all that information is able to be disaggregated so that we can see if there are changes based on ethnicity or social identity or age, so that we know where the gaps are and we know how to make our program as inclusive as it can possibly be. I'll hand over to Anna to talk about our Reimagining volunteering research.
Yeah, hi everybody. So the Reimagining volunteering research was a separate piece of research from the youth engagement research that took place after the youth survey was the youth research was concluded, as a wider research into what should volunteerism as a whole look like for New Zealand Red Cross for our strategy 2030. So there was a survey component, and we surveyed both respondents who had an existing relationship with the Red Cross, as well as respondents that didn't previously. In addition to the surveys, we carried out 13 different focus groups around the country, as well as a literature review of other volunteering research that's being carried out either domestically or in global literature. This kind of the big discoveries of the back of this research was around volunteer motivations, and finding that the volunteers were they felt most motivated to volunteer when they felt concerned about the group that they were serving or could do something for a cause that was important to them. So kind of knowing what they kind of like how they impacted the outcomes of other people, I guess, was kind of like at the forefront of this. And in terms of likelihood to participate with the Red Cross, the highest interest was in local humanitarian and disaster response work. And as could be kind of anticipated, some of the biggest barriers were time and availability of people to do some of these volunteering engagements. So from here, in terms of moving from kind of like a research paper into changing the ways that an organization works, it's a really, really long road, and we're only really at the beginning of that. So this research was concluded, I think, around December 2021. And in, I think it was April or May 2022, the national board have agreed to outcomes as a result of the research. So the 4 outcomes that they've agreed to for the next, now I think 7 years, are increasing our inclusiveness, building effective leadership and an effective structure to kind of create a better volunteer experience, as well as then increase the impactfulness and meaning behind the volunteer opportunities that we have, as well as then take a big look at our recognition and support structures. So those were the big 4 outcomes that then kind of like how it's really kind of started coming to life from the research findings into actionable action. So that agreement from the top level, from the national board. And then from there, what followed was our organization, as a part of the Strategy 2030, has carried out a big organizational operating model review over 2021-2022, which then has created a people experience and support group headed by Fiona, who's with us on the call. And within it, there's now a new directorate called Membership and Volunteering, and that group itself then has now overarching responsibility over the member and volunteer experience. So I feel like that's one of the first like really tangible outcomes, is that we've started looking at the way that the organization is structured to work out what structure would then serve us in reaching those outcomes. There were several gaps kind of identified in terms of who's responsible for what parts, as well as we found that there's not real equity in the experience that our volunteers are having, because their primary point of contact is within the function of the program that they're serving. So where we are right now is that it's actually just 6-7 weeks ago, on 1st of February, that this team has been put into place. So we're starting to have conversations. It's kind of very much the beginning of starting to have these conversations with all these different volunteer programs. Our 4 major volunteer programs: disaster response, refugee support, retail volunteerism, and then Drivers for Meals on Wheels are all coming to table to start looking at like how can we start creating that equitability within the experience that all these volunteers are having in our programs. And with those accountabilities built in, it's really beautiful to start seeing that now. It's really very much changed the conversation that we're able to have. However, there aren't really that many tangible outcomes in the first year and a half, other than we're kind of still, if we go one slide back onto those outcomes, the pieces that we really have been able to work on so far is that leadership structure, as well as then that outcome to effective leadership and structure has been the first one off the gate that we've started tackling. So yeah, that is us for the overviews.
Awesome. Thank you so much, team. Really appreciate that overview. We want to provide a bit of an overview of the journey. I'd say it is a journey. I hate that thing, journey, but it is a journey that we've been on, looking backwards to go forward. And so this is sort of more of a chance for you to ask us any questions that you have. But to get us going on questions, we have pre-prepared some of our own questions we thought that you might be interested in. So I'm going to start off with a question. And my question is, I just completely love that we've been going out talking to members and particularly talking to young people about what's important. But panel, how do you know, what gives you confidence that we're actually listening to what those people have said? Because this is the whole idea of actually how do we bring those insights into our work. What gives it away to you that we're actually listening? Aspen, you to have a think about that.
I can quickly jump in first. I'd say, I guess my marker of how I knew I was listening when I was carrying out the youth engagement strategy was not always hearing the things I wanted to hear, I guess. So like hearing that critical feedback, that's when I guess like people are taking part, and that's when you're listening to them, because they're not just telling you the sugar-coated answer, you get the warts and all. And I had a few members who have volunteered for New Zealand Red Cross for a really long time, have some pretty exciting words for me. That was quite colourful, but it was in the name of wanting to better the organisation. So I guess that was one way I could tell I was listening. But also what I did is my role that I played within the youth team during the youth engagement strategy was I was the communication lead for internal comms. So I produced a newsletter, and that would go out every kind of month to month and a half, just to kind of let people know where we're at. So we've done this. As a result of this, this is what we're doing. And we always had an open inbox of anything else. Have we missed anything? Does this resonate with you? And then it was also been in relationship with the people who were working in the local regions in New Zealand. So at the time, I think there was about 15 areas in New Zealand. And so having a close relationship with those on the ground to be able to say, are we missing something? Have you heard differently? When is your next area council meeting? Can we come along? So it's, it's simple, but it's also been face-to-face with people as well. Because realizing that New Zealand Red Cross, a lot of members are on the older spectrum, and so things like Zoom and Teams was a bit too much. And so I guess that's how we knew we were listening as well, because we were face to face and having those fun, colourful conversations.
Thanks, Charlie. That is fantastic. I love that sense of you looking at the modes of connection and making, actually going out of the things that you might be used to. And then, but that also that sense of, hey, I've actually heard some information that I'd not considered before. I might actually find that a bit jarring as well, because that is actually suggesting you're hearing something from a different perspective. And that's so important as well, and capturing it. Yeah, thanks so much for that. And we have got a question from Louise in the chat. So she says, thank you all for an amazing presentation. She's wondering if we could talk a little bit about the process of developing the methodology for these studies. Did you partner with external researchers or a university, for instance? And was it easy or difficult to figure that out? Maybe we could start with the youth strategy.
Yeah, so the method for the youth engagement strategy was we used design-led thinking. So just quickly, if anyone's never done that, it's define the problem, you test the thinking, you prototype, all of that kind of thing. So it's working kind of what are our assumptions, and then we tested them. So we came up with a list of assumptions with our national youth panel. So we have at the time there was a group of young people in youth governance, and we said, what do you assume about youth engagement in New Zealand Red Cross? And we had a bunch of assumptions, and then we went away and tested those by doing all the things I spoke about. We also worked in partnership with the University of Canterbury, and I believe that partnership went on to do the Reimagining volunteering as well, but Anna can correct me if I'm wrong with that. And it was challenging at times, because I think they wanted us to move at pace and we couldn't move as quickly as they wanted us to. They're like, okay, cool, so we've done this, now do that. And we had to kind of slow down, that we didn't race ahead and leave our New Zealand Red Cross people behind in the dust. So that was the challenging part of it, but it was really good to kind of have the academic overview on it. And if you go onto the New Zealand Red Cross website, there is actually the whole research paper. So there is the strategy, which is, the pretty, what are we going to do? And what keeps Kurt accountable in his job. And then there is the research. So what's all the kind of real nerdy dive deep into how we did it. And that was done in partnership with University of Canterbury, which is one of the universities here. So I personally think it was a really good idea to engage a university because we were also engaging youngish people. I'm not sure if they were under 30, but they were academics. They were on the younger side. And we deliberately did that for a reason. But yeah, it had its challenges, but that's all around like that. Like I said before, that communication piece and exercising patience.
That's great,
Yeah, so
Charlie. And yeah, Anna, have you got anything from the Reimagining volunteering?
yeah, so the partner for the Reimagining volunteering research was the Victoria University of Wellington, and they carried out the data collection as well as data analysis for the survey, and then help with kind of that methodology, making sure that we were kind of surveying representative samples, etc. So they were providing a lot of guidance with that, as well as then the tools for the data collection and the people to analyze the final results of that survey.
I'll just, quickly jump in again and say, so with the youth team, we didn't just go out on a complete whim. The manager at the time, Devin, has a background in doing design-led thinking. So there was kind of someone who knew the ropes, knew what we were doing. It wasn't just we're going to go out on a whim. So we did have, I guess, experience with us. It was just internal in that sense. So I'd also speak to that.
Right. Thanks both Anna and Charlie. And I know from my own experience, actually, the research companies, if you don't have that sort of internal information, intel skill set, they will help you through it as well. You just need to build a bit more time into that sort of really scoping and discovery phase of your research setup. But I've really found a lot of researchers are now tapped into this. How do you do inclusive research as well? And especially if you ask them deliberately about inclusive research and ask them some questions like, what about for people with disabilities, for example, or how are you going to reach out to young people? What do you know about it? And they'll connect with their community too. I'm going to actually ask a panel. We've got some other questions lined up. Would another panel member like to ask a question?
I've forgotten the other questions. I can't see the notes. So I'm sorry.
I can ask a question because I know the questions we lined up. So another question was, how do you measure sort of actions that are about people engagement, involving people, the huge span of initiatives that are coming out from what members are wanting, what young people are wanting to connect and engage? How do you design a measurement framework and approach around that? You've done all your research and you're going to start implementing. How do you work out whether you're going to succeed? Got some outcomes, but what else? So I think, Kurt, that was a bit of a chance for you to chat about the work you've been doing.
Sure. So recently we've been working on some measures that will help us to track our progress on Strategy 2030 and the youth engagement strategy. So basically, we've taken all of those we will statements, those high conceptual statements in those strategies, and we've tried to find metrics that fit each of those statements. So we can ask service users, and we can ask young people who we interact with, we can ask our employees, our volunteers, and our members, and we can ask external stakeholders questions that can indicate whether we're doing a good job by our statement or we're not. So examples of those might be perceived levels of community resilience, perceived levels of personal resilience. It could be about hope. It could be about sense of inclusion. So together, a number of these metrics help to give us an indication over time of whether our services are improving, whether they're becoming more inclusive, more impactful, or whether nothing's changing at all. And again, we can track that over a number of different lines, so age and ethnicity and social identity, so that we can see whether that change is equitable, whether our services are meeting everyone's needs or only the needs of a few.
Great, thank you, Kurt. So this sort of concept really of developing a system of measurement, putting those sort of measures across a range of the activities you do, so you can keep assessing that range of activities all the time. So I call that developing a learning system. So you're creating feedback loops, you're creating similar types of themes or ideas, and then collating the information around it. So in a way, you're continuing your research and insight collection along the process as well.
Yes, I would add that community resilience is really difficult to measure because everyone has a different idea of what resilience is. So we've done our best with things like youth psychological first aid, but even then we can only really assess confidence. We can only assess the perceptions that those young people have who participated in that course. So we haven't done that 3-year longitudinal monitoring into changes in communities based on our interventions.
Yeah. But also knowing what you can't measure means that you are careful on not making judgments based on the things you can measure, because you might be missing part of the picture still. So keep asking those questions. I've got another question, unless I can't see anything else in the chat. Implementation. So Anna started talking about implementing and how long implementation can take. I guess it's a question about how are we able to move from research into implementation. What have you learned along the way, Anna, about turning a research product into something that can get off the website and into actual business strategy?
Yes, thanks, Fiona. Yeah, I think that is the big question when you're working, especially when you're working with that organization like the Red Cross that really the membership spans all generations. There's a lot of people that all live at the same time, but they don't live in the same times. So there are kind of like different parts of the organization internally who want to either move much faster or who want to move much slower in terms of changing the way that we operate, or changing their approaches. So with that, there's kind of really two strategies that you can take. One, which is to use kind of more of an enforcement type of strategy, come top down and say, these are the things that we're going to start doing. Kind of like get with the program. Or the other approach is to take a little bit more time, and it's more of a humanitarian approach where you take a lot more time in the beginning to build consensus, to build trust, to kind of like talk to people about the benefits of working in new ways. And ultimately, I guess so far for Fiona, myself, the jury is still out whether this approach is going to then kind of be the turtle that beats the rabbit in the race. Because right now we've still been in that very, very slow phase of talking extensively, talking to people, finding out what their positions are, especially when it comes to those 4 outcomes, trying to kind of like work out what their internal position is of all the different people who have volunteers in their teams or who don't have volunteers in their teams. Why do they do that? Why do they not have volunteers? What opportunities have we got available right now? Are those the only opportunities that could exist in those teams? And then kind of like working out what would national coordination look like if we're trying to do something that is guided, like standardized across the nation, in terms of that equity of the volunteer experience that we want to provide, versus then the freedom of the different areas, the functions, and the regions to implement on a local level. That has been a lot of like really big conversations with people who already take great pride in the way that they do things. In many cases around New Zealand, the programs are working on a local level, but what we have been missing is that ability to provide something on a consistent level from a nationwide perspective. And so it feels like since it was last May 21 that we were able to finally publish their agreed outcomes that the board had bought into. And we have then been able to just start initiating these conversations with the big volunteer programs, as well as with the area teams who are supporting volunteer and membership in the local areas across the function. So it's been a lot of very, very slow progress, but hopefully will be then less resistance when it comes to the time to actually start implementing the changes, so that by that time people feel comfortable about what the changes that they can anticipate that's coming. They can trust the team that is implementing the change, and they can trust that whatever comes from the change will also benefit them in some way, because all of their concerns about what is the status quo versus what would the imagined future state would look like, that their kind of like perspective has been taken into consideration in it. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Anna. So you effectively, what I'm hearing saying is, once you're done with engaging your core audience, you have to then go and engage everybody who has to deliver for that, deliver the change. It's like your engagement job isn't over at that point. In fact, it's just begun, and you have to achieve that along with lots of tasks and actions to build the momentum for that shift. Yeah, so you probably use a lot of your techniques you used in the research phase as well to help.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of time, and so I think we can do one more question, which is another question from Louise, who's curious with regards to youth engagement strategy, whether the idea of connecting with universities as a way to connect more young people has been discussed during the research, and if yes, what was said about it?
Awesome, thanks for your question, Louise. So what happened was, previously we had a few university clubs in different universities, but it was very piecemeal. So Otago University, which is all the way down the bottom of the South Island, would do one thing, and then University of Victoria and Wellington would do a completely other thing, and then Canterbury would sometimes do something, and it would be a fundraiser and all of that. So what was discussed when doing the youth engagement strategy thing was, do we have a place to offer in university clubs? A lot of universities in New Zealand have a lot of clubs, so we were already kind of competing with Amnesty International. I can't even think of the other ones at the top of my head, Doctors Without Borders. There was lots of things in clubs, and we kind of went, we don't actually know what our unique offer is. And so that was, I guess, parked until the implementation stage when we actually knew what we could offer students. Because what we heard back with those who had volunteered with us was it was completely different experiences up and down the country. And so I think it was about, okay, well, what's our unique offering for that age group? And it could be things like international humanitarian law. I'm going to give a shout out to our cousin country, Australia. They do some really great stuff in the international humanitarian law space. So I think it was more, when I was there, let's investigate it. What's actually our unique offering, and where can we make the most impact? Most of the time it was just fundraising previously, but young people said that's cool, but actually what else do we get out of it besides just doing a feel good fundraiser? And so that's kind of what it was at when I was there. I don't know what's happened since, so I'll hand over to Kurt if there's been any more discussions, or if we're still focusing on the younger age group at the moment, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so at least one of those university clubs is still going, and it is always tricky to work out what those practical actions are that we can take as an organization to keep young people engaged. But I think it's always going back to that research, back to those findings, and looking at what really motivates them to volunteer and what they told us. So I read that research every week, and it sort of reminds me of where I need to go.
That's great. I really love this idea of going. I think so much, oftentimes we go, oh, we need something from somebody else, so we're going to reach out to a university or do whatever because we need the young students or whatever. Whereas actually this concept is, what do we have to offer them? Because actually, if we're coming there to get to ask for something from them, we want to make an offering too. It's a relationship, it's a partnership. So really like that concept that's been built into that youth engagement strategy and our ongoing approach. I'm conscious we have 3 minutes left. So I am going to wrap us up, and it's because I also avoided one of the hardest questions, which was about how do you work with your board on these sort of matters. We can come back to that maybe in a future session. And just before I close off with a karakia, because you also use karakia to close and end, to draw it all back together, to give us that moment of collecting and then passing into our next place. I want to say, first of all, thank you so much, Sarah, Anna, Charlie, Kurt, for all your work, not only today, but the ongoing and future work that you'll be doing around making sure these bits of research and strategy become alive. And also want to put a special thanks out to Louise for her huge amount of work to make this long night of research a reality and bring us all together as a community. Thank you so much, Louise. I love your passion, and you've been so generous to us in helping us set this up as well. Thank you. So I'm going to close us with a karakia. Kia whakaria te tapu, kia watia ai te ara, kia turuki whakataha ai, homie, hui, kai kie. Yeah, so restrictions are moved aside, so the pathway is clear to return to everyday activities, uniting as one, uniting in conscious thought. Go well, everybody. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much to all of you for the session today.
Bye.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.